Choja Warriors, it is another beautiful morning. It is always great to be together. I am thankful for the time that you have given me. Today, as we get together, we are going to discuss some of the similarities between greatness and happiness. And the reason that is important is because oftentimes we are chasing one of the two, but I have come to understand that it is more of just kind of our perception of the words, right? So some people will say, well, I don't chase happiness because that's short term. I chase joy. And there are other people who say, well, I don't mess with joy because joy is finicky and is external, but happiness is like your passion. And so what I've come to realize is sometimes these words, they are being used in different ways, where when one person says happiness, the other person is thinking, oh, you just want a big house and a big car and all these other things. And then when another person says happiness, they're actually talking about their ability to contribute, to give, and to preserve for other people. And so we are going to have this discussion. And I thought the best thing that we could do is I actually wanted to read a little snippet from February 20th, 1898. And it was spoken by a Reverend John Palmer. And it says, if true greatness consists in that self-sacrificing heroism and devotion which makes a man insensible and indifferent to his own personal welfare, interests, comfort, and advantages, and to deny himself of all for the sake of others, and for the elevation and advancement of others, without a single promise of reward, we say, if these constitute greatness, then Richard Allen, the first bishop of the AME Church, was great. And I came across Richard Allen, and I actually found it to be very interesting just listening to his story. So Richard Allen, he was actually born during slavery. So when he was born into slavery, his name was Negro Richard. And so he worked in the 1700s, and him and his brother, and they did. And it says that he was able to earn $2,000 to buy both his freedom and his brother's freedom. And you find in the definition that we just read of greatness and why greatness and happiness are brothers and sisters in my interpretation of the words, is because you find that first and foremost, greatness requires diligence, work, but it also requires looking out for other people. So in this instance, right, Richard, somewhere along the way, he had already had enough money to buy his own freedom. He could have sat there and said, well, my brother is working, he has the same abilities that I have, and he needs to go ahead and figure out how he can do this for himself. I'm not going to stay around here any longer because he's not pulling his weight. He's not doing his part. Instead, it says that Richard saved up enough money where he was able to buy the freedom for him and his brother, which means he worked through a point in time where he had enough money for his own freedom, and yet he continued working because he was sacrificing himself for his brother, which is just absolutely incredible. And so as Richard, it says that one of the nights that he was out at a church, that he was listening to a sermon, and he said the preacher, he said that it opened his eyes and he saw that he was so less of a person. And you find that when you often look at just from the spiritual aspect of our beings, right, that we fall short in a lot of ways, right? Like we have very well-meaning intentions, and even as selfless as Richard has shown himself to be, he knew that compared to perfection, compared to love, that he falls short in some ways. And so you find that the second aspect of greatness is that they are humble, right? It's not that they are always talking about how amazing they are and all the things that they've done. They always are humble in their experiences because they understand that there is growth always growth. And so they are striving towards this. And so Richard understood that when you're comparing yourself to the perfection that is his creator, that he's like, look, I'm falling short. When you talk about loving and what love is, he's like, I'm falling short. So Richard had devoted himself to service, and he made it his life mission to bring the gospel to other black slaves. And so he was able to establish a congregation. And in case you weren't familiar, AME, what that stands for is African Methodist Episcopal. So he was able to establish an AME church where other African slaves were able to attend and to learn. And so as Richard now had his congregation, he started realizing some of the issues that his people were facing. And so he made it his mission to address these issues. So one of them is he realized that the children were not being educated. And if you're familiar, it was actually illegal to educate slaves. And this is actually one of the few laws where if you were a slave owner and you educated a slave, then you were both going to be executed, right? Like there is little capital punishment when it came to the treatment of a slave, but educating them would put you within the punishment of the government, which just speaks on the importance, the gravity of learning and growing. And it is a sad thing that we live in a time where I believe I read the stat, it said like 92% of people do not use the library in any way, shape, or form. And it's just unfortunate that there was a point in time that it was so sacred to read, to learn, to grow, that it was a capital punishment offense to educate a slave. So understanding that they lived at a time where blacks were not able to be educated, Richard was able to use his church to educate the children during the day, and he educated the adults at night. And so Richard was able to take the things that he was learning as he was growing, and he was able to use this to help others that were less fortunate. And again, you find that there is a selflessness that you find within greatness, but then also understanding that the change that you want to create in the world, that it starts with you, right? If you want more people to read, then you should volunteer to read to them. If you want more people to be better with their finances, then you should be out educating people on their finances. If you want people to invest more in your community, then you have to invest in your community, right? We live in a world where people are asking others more than they ask of themselves. And you find that that is not greatness, and it is also not the recipe to achieve happiness. See, happiness is that inner voice inside of you, as I refer to that inner drum beat inside of you. And if you march to that beat, then you will always be content in your actions because you are always progressing towards something. As humans, we desire progression, to feel, to know that we are better off today than we were yesterday, that we are growing towards something. And even if we can't get there as quickly as we want to, just understanding that we are progressing is a big deal. It's enough for us to feel content in our experiences. So it's important to always be growing, to always be pushing, to always be striving. So in addition to Richard spending his time educating and teaching and reinvesting in his community and also devoting his life to the gospel because he felt it was that important, Richard also was able to work on writing. So there was a point in time where, as a free man, Richard now he's starting to write publications. He has a free man's journal and he's sending it out. And within this journal, he speaks against like things of slavery and segregation and other issues and colonialism and all these issues that people are dealing with at this time that a lot of people would not say anything, right? Because a part of what many of us deal with is it's difficult to sacrifice because it's what you have, right? Like you're giving up what you have in hopes of something more. And for Richard, he was willing to sacrifice all that he had achieved. He had achieved his freedom. He had established a congregation. He was doing good things in the community. Yet he also spoke out against the wrongs that he saw. And when you speak out against the wrongs that you see, and I don't care your color, race, creed, religion, culture, I don't care at all. If you speak out against those that are in power, it is not going to end well for you, generally speaking, right? And whether you're speaking out against the government, whether you're speaking out against someone who's in charge at a school or at your job or in a congregation, if you speak out against those in power, they usually flex the power against you. And so most people are uncomfortable and unwilling. They lack the overall desire to speak out against an issue that everybody agrees behind closed door probably could use some tweaking, but nobody really wants to say anything. So Richard put himself in a place where he put his thoughts on paper and he shared it, right? He's like, look, I'm the editor-in-chief, that's me, that's my thoughts. And he always attacked these issues. Now, a lot of times he attacked them from the perspective of the Bible, right? Like this is what people are defined. This is who he loves everybody, right? Like God doesn't segregate, it's man that segregates. So when you're looking at a lot of these issues that is going on around you, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to put myself out there? Am I willing to put my name on a piece of paper that says that I believe that this is what's right, and then we go from there, right? I mean, and Richard, and I did mention he changed his name from Negro Richard to Richard Allen once he had bought his freedom. So Richard, now he put his name on it, and we're not as familiar with Richard and his story, but it's no different than really even if you think about the founding of America, and then they wrote their name on the Declaration of Independence, right? Like this is the same idea, right? If you are going to put your name on something, then you put yourself at risk against the powers that are, and then you run the risk of being, executed, being put to death, that you have put your life, your well-being, and your success at risk because you believe that there is more that could be achieved for the greater masses. And so it's really important to understand that that is the decision that Richard's making when he is writing out this journal, speaking against these wrongs, where he's not just doing what he believes is right in one sense, he's also letting everyone know that this is the way that the world should be. This is the world that I'm working to create. And then whatever happens after that, like he's okay with that, right? And that you're going to find that is a characteristic in greatness. And you're going to find that that's a characteristic in happiness. And you also may not know, but Richard actually was a part of the Underground Railroad. So his congregation was out in Philadelphia. And so he was often one of the stops along the way. And then if you're familiar with that, then what you would do is you would house them, you'd feed them, you'd help them out, you'd let them know the next location as they're on their way to establishing and gaining their freedom. Right? So Richard was not only talking about the way things should be, he was also educating, he was also writing, and he was also taking the risk of taking in other people who were running towards their freedom, which is just truly a powerful statement. Now, even though Richard may not have been monetarily rewarded for all that he was doing with his life, do any of you have a doubt that Richard was not happy with his life? That Richard felt every single person that came and visited him through the Underground Railroad, that he was able to send to the next stop, that he was able to encourage and to help. Do you think that he felt happy in his life, even though he did not gain $1 from that? I do. Do you think that every time the Richard and his congregation, that when they got together and they went over the gospel, he shared his faith and the importance that he thought it was in their life and in his life, do you think that he felt happy about that? I do. So you find that often when you're chasing greatness, that if you are listening to the drumbeat of your heart, if you are chasing happiness, if you are in tune with your soul, then you'll find that you will gain greatness and you will gain happiness together, which is really the overall goal, because there are people out there who have chased and have achieved greatness and they are not any more happy. And by greatness, what I mean is we're not talking about the definition that we just gave, because it has, whether you're talking about scripture and it's better to give than to receive, or whether you're just talking about studies. There are scientific studies that shows that people respond better when they receive something, when they give something more than they receive it. So the way that this study had went, and basically the way that it had calculated it is, once we get to a certain financial number, right, where generally speaking you're able to kind of cover all your bills and you don't really think about money, that it's not really much of a gain after that, right? When you get your first million, right, going from 1 million to 10 million, it's not as big of a jump as going from like 30,000 to 300,000 or something like that, right? Like there is a point in time where you're just like, okay, look, I got a bunch of zeros after my one, like, all right, cool. What do you want to do today, right? Because we could do anything, right? So at some point, what they did with the study is they basically put some monitors on these people, and they would read certain scenarios, and then they would gauge their reaction. So, for example, then basically what they said is, if they told them, okay, you got another $1 million, they weren't as happy, they weren't as excited, they weren't as motivated by that as much as you told them, hey, you gave $1,000 to this charity, or you paid off this person's debt, like you did things like that. And then they responded in a more happy, a more energized way. And so whether you want to talk about science or when you talk about scripture, the idea is it's better to give than to receive. And if you're a part of your chasing greatness, and I believe that each one of us, as we are chasing happiness, that there is an aspect of our goal that is helping someone else, right? That's just, I mean, I'm not saying that there's a study on that. That's just, Dre's own personal experiences and engagements with lots of people. That I find that when you really get down to it, that everybody is striving for something that has a positive impact on someone else. And that the closer and the stronger that relationship and that bond is, the more likely I've seen that you are able to persevere through the obstacles. And the reason that's important is I've met people where I'm like, hey, what would you like to do? They say, I just want to make a lot of money. I was like, okay, that's great. How would you like to do that? I'm pretty open. Let's just find ways to make a lot of money. Point me in that direction, and I'll go do that. Right? Whether that's hitman, garbage man, mailman, like I don't care. You just point me in the direction, I'll go do that. And I find that those are the people that are lacking, right? And so you'll think of anyone that you've read a tragic story about where they've committed suicide, and you're like, wow, they were very successful, right? They were doing amazing things. I'm really surprised that they were battling those demons. Or you'll find someone that has drug or alcoholism and different problems where you're like, wow, I'm really surprised that they were dealing with that. It seemed like they had all the fame and the fortune. I wonder what was wrong. I'd be happy in that situation. But the truth is, if the path you took to gain your greatness, your success, your happiness, your wealth is not aligned with your path of happiness, then they don't intersect, right? Like I often refer to that, right? What benefit is it for a man to gain the whole world if it costs him his soul? And that inner drumbeat, that message inside of you, that selflessness, that willingness to do for others, that is your soul. Right? So if you are connected with yourself, if you're understanding, if you invest the time in speaking with yourself, it's why meditation is so amazing and all the studies show you. It's why people talk about mindfulness and just being in a still mind. Even Albert Einstein talked about that. There is abundant information out there that tells you that if you're able to be still and listen to your soul, your inner message, that you will feel better, that you will achieve more, and that you will be aligned with your mind, body, and spirit. And so it's important to understand that the question isn't even as much, does greatness and happiness, are they aligned? It's more of a question of, am I aligned? Because they should be, right? You don't want to sacrifice anything. And I find that oftentimes whenever someone doesn't have an alignment between their happiness and their greatness, it is most likely fear, right? Like I generally don't find that people are awful people. I generally find that everybody is trying to do the best they can in their situation as best as they believe that they can. And they often have a fear somewhere that has tricked them that the only way to achieve the greatness that I'm looking for is by sacrificing my happiness, and generally that means sacrificing the benefit of others, right? So violence and crime and things like that, right? Nobody really wants to do that. I know some people will tell you that they do. I find that people don't generally actually want to do that. That if you could offer them a better way, then they would take that better way. They just don't believe there's another way, or their fear and self-doubt has created this illusion that the only way that they're going to be able to help others is by taking this path, the path of least resistance, or the dark side, as maybe we could use. And if you were thinking about Star Wars, right? I mean, you already know. I'm a huge fan of that. So if you're thinking of episode 3, for instance, right? Anakin, his idea was, I'm having these visions, I'm having these nightmares, and my love of my life, Padme, she dies. So what can I do to keep her alive? And he starts his path on some of this idea. Okay, well, let's stick to the light. So I'm thinking, okay, I'll be a Jedi. There's a lot of Jedi information. If I become a Jedi Master, I can get into the temples. I can see all sorts of information, and then I can use this information to help, the love of my life. And then that wasn't happening fast enough for him, where he started having more doubt, more fears, and he's like, I need to find someone who's speaking my language, a quicker path for me to be able to help my wife. And then that path, when he ended up coming into contact with Palpatine, he's like, okay, this is everything that I want, right? Like, he sold him a dream, and he's like, this is it. And he's like, okay, where do I sign up? And then he gave him a list of stuff that he needed to do. He's like, well, You have to kill a lot of your friends. You have to go into the temple and kill a lot of these children that are going to come and be Jedis. You're going to have to sacrifice everything else, which is just, you have to be very selfish, is basically what you told him. And you're not selfish in the sense that I'm just going to make sure that I take care of the people I love, but selfish in the sense that you want to destroy the success of everyone else around you. And I promise you that you'll be the most successful person here. Which is like true in a sense, right? Because you've destroyed everybody else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've gained anything. And so he's dealing with that same struggle, and as a result, he gives into that. He feels like there's no other option for him. And so Anakin does all this, and he ends up becoming so vengeful, so blind that he's losing his wife, he's losing his friends, he's losing his sanity, his humanity. And so while it may not be that extreme, right? It may not be that extreme for you or I, but it is a true statement to say that when you are depending on the path that you take for happiness and greatness, that when they're not aligned, I have found that it's just good people that are blinded by fear and self-doubt. And so I do want to make sure that we just have that general understanding. So now the question is, as you are chasing your happiness, are you chasing your happiness? And by that I mean, are you allowing fear and self-doubt to cause you to make a detour on what actually is that drumbeat inside of you, where it's like, this is not going to work. People are not going to respond well to that. Or are you following through? Because I have found that if you follow through, that the world starts to react in a positive way. As you're like, I have arrived, this is what my goal is, things start aligning a lot better for you than if you're hedging, where you're like, well, this may work, so I'm sort of dabbling here and I'm sort of dabbling there. Dabbling's not going to make it happen, right? Greatness is not dabbling, right? Richard Allen, he has showed you greatness is consistently taking these small actions that may be insignificant and may not make practical sense in one particular instant, but as you stack it up and as you continue building over a lifetime, it is greatness. It is the definition of greatness, that you are sacrificing, that you are helping, that you have no expectation of a reward or return, but you know that you are better internally for it because you are following that inner drumbeat. And that is going to be a mindset moment. I'm always thankful for our time together. If you guys have any comments or questions, leave them in there. If you enjoyed this, leave a 5-star review, make a comment, let me know, share it, anything you can do to help. I always appreciate it. I'll engage with you guys any way that I can. I'm always thankful for our time together. Continue blessings on your journey to become the champion of your dream life.